Behind the palace gates, rumors circulated for weeks. What was going on with Prince Louie? Why had the youngest royal disappeared from view? However, right now, 3 minutes ago, King Charles broke the quiet with an astonishing, "The globe is reeling" from a tragic announcement. The reality is more than just devastating. It reveals a more serious royal dilemma than nobody anticipated. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. It also began quietly, silently. There was no explanation for the updates made to royal calendars. Public appearances continued without the well-known smile of a young prince. Initially, palace assistance was rejected. It's a habit. They said it was a child sleeping, but when the days stretched into weeks, it was hard to ignore the absence. Everyone sensed that something was off. The silence that the palace declined to confront was filled by social media. Each and every darker ideas were fanned by blurry photographs, cancelled engagements, and unsolved questions. Was it a secret mishap, a health issue, or something else? Was the monarchy frantically attempting to remain hidden? The whispers became louder the longer the palace remained silent. Then the moment arrived for which nobody was ready. Instead of stepping forward with assurance, King Charles, he had obvious weight on his shoulders. He spoke slowly, deliberately, and emotionally. "This wasn't the refined, this is not just about a young boy," he remarked, his voice sounding like that of a ruler giving prepared assurances. "This was a grandfather struggling to speak, stumbling. It's about everything we've failed to protect." That one sentence altered everything because it became evident at that point that this was not a small setback or a fleeting worry. Charles wasn't talking about privacy or timetables. He was talking about accountability, about regret, about a reality that had been overlooked for too long. According to people near the palace, the atmosphere as oppressive. As the comment was made, senior assistants reportedly lowered their eyes, completely conscious that there had been a purpose behind this stillness. It had been intentional, meticulously planned, and now tragically revealed. Long before the public became aware of Louis's absence, questions had been raised behind closed doors. Subtle indicators, early warnings, worries that were minimized, postponed, or ignored in favor of continuing as usual. The crown moved forward, leaving behind something brittle. William's and Catherine's roles have also been closely examined. Why have we waited so long? Why put up with the nasty conjecture, the pressure, and the rumors? Insiders claim that it was not an easy choice to remain silent. It was a decision motivated by dread, fear of being discovered, fear of the repercussions, dread of the consequences of admitting the truth. And now that Charles has finally spoken, the appearance of peace has vanished. The story is no longer within the palace's authority. The truth is wanting to be heard and is pushing outward. However, as the true story starts to come apart, as the king's voice breaks, because disease isn't the only issue here. It has to do with betrayal hidden under the marble of the palace. The palace staff saw something was wrong before the rest of the world did. Hushed disputes and late-night doctor visits in Kensington's East Wing, as well as a nursery that became quieter every day. We now understand why Prince Louie had previously experienced unsettling murmurs throughout his early years. Something about the energy in the Louie wing had shifted, even in a household used to caution. Employees who made light of the youngest royal's charm was now cautious. Aides looked at each other, maids lingered by his door longer, and footmen frequently came back from the hallway with a tight mouth and a pale complexion. It wasn't a disease in the conventional sense. It was perplexity and terrified of what could be found. Behind closed doors, the public saw happy family photos, but Catherine had already started covertly employing medical specialists who aren't on the official royal payroll. These weren't just wellness assessments. They were thorough developmental assessments carried out in complete privacy, away from palace clinics and out of sight of conventional advisors. Normally so calm, Catherine had become clearly exhausted. Her days were divided between her royal responsibilities and consultations with pediatric neurologists that are emotionally taxing. She didn't want the media to know about it, because she was afraid of being misunderstood, not because she was ashamed. The pivotal moment occurred during a play session in the afternoon. Breathless, one of the assistants hurried to Catherine to inform her that Louie had suddenly passed out. Everyone in the room was shaken by a sudden silence that had no apparent cause, no visible injuries, and no bruises. The ensuing terror was instantaneous. Louie was revived when a medical team was sent in, but at that moment, it was obvious that something had shifted. Shaken to her core, Catherine summoned William. Within an hour of leaving a state function, the pair withdrew from public life for the following 2 weeks. Completely, however, not all members of the family were aware. Charles, the grandfather, was kept in the dark by Catherine's decision while being heavily involved in public appearances and diplomatic briefings. Not outside of harshness, but defense. She required time, but Camilla was furious. Her continuous questions about Louie's location were met with evasive responses, and it is said that she criticized Catherine of being overly theatrical. An already tense family dynamic was further complicated by this conflict. In the interim, the royal privacy clause, as it is known inside, was invoked by palace authorities, a rarely used procedure that prevents media outlets from covering certain health-related questions of prominent or elderly kids. Any leakage would be confronted with vigorous legal action. Although this clause had not been invoked in more than 20 years, its abrupt execution conveyed a strong message. There was a problem, and the company refused to make it public. However, that just increased suspicion. The more quiet whispers outside the palace got louder. As royal physicians search for solutions, their findings result in a string of dramatic conflicts within the palace. When King Charles attempted to bring the family together during a difficult time, Camilla had other plans. Concern quickly gave way to confrontation as Camilla's increasing power distorted the story. Catherine was not amused by Prince Louie's condition. Camilla's involvement first appeared to be well-meaning. She offered condolences, asked how Louis was doing, and even suggested a private family get-together to help Catherine and William. However, her tone swiftly changed behind the scenes. During a private luncheon with senior assistants, Camilla claimed that the media was profiting from quiet and panic, dismissing the mounting health concerns as media frenzy. Her days later, the precise comments, "This is just another overblown royal flu," were released and shocked palace circles. Already emotionally spent, Catherine felt incredibly deceived. From there, it only got worse. When Louis was allowed to skip a significant royal charity event, Camilla reportedly invited a few members of the press to the event as a health precaution. In any case, cameras were given more access, coverage was increased, and Camilla took center stage while her grandchildren grinned, waving, and discussing the monarchy's bright future. Regarding Catherine, this was the last straw. She saw it not only as insensitivity, but also as a calculated move to divert attention from Louis and in Camilla's own family. The tension erupted into an uncommon and violent altercation behind closed doors. Strongly devoted to Catherine and troubled by the drama that was developing, Princess Anne confronted Camilla in private. What started out as a the conversation immediately got out of hand. Camilla allegedly responded to Anne's accusation that she had taken advantage of a helpless youngster in order to strengthen her public persona by retorted that by sheltering behind a sick child, no one was aiding the crown. The space became chilly. For days, that phrase would reverberate through the palace halls. Torn between leadership and allegiance, Charles tried to intervene, but Camilla would not back down. She maintained that Catherine's control over media narratives had grown risky, asserting that it was causing discord and inciting fear inside the family. She pleaded with Charles to enforce more stringent restrictions on what may be disclosed to the public and recommended that Catherine replace the important media liaison at her discretion. Charles paused, but the harm had already been done, completed. Camilla had also started advocating behind the scenes for greater focus on her grandchildren. Press announcements gradually changed the royal focus on the Parker Bowles side of the family. Features were composed to increase their profile Pictures were posted, and even educational activities were organized. It was intentional, strategic, and utterly disconnected from the emotional impact of what William and Catherine were going through. A late-night strategy conference with senior advisors was the tipping moment for William. He turned to his father in a moment of anguish and rage, calling Camilla's behavior nothing more than callous disregard. He charged her with rewriting legacy lines by taking advantage of the royal crisis. It was unprocessed. It was intimate. Additionally, it was a moment of Charles's future king and his present wife are at odds. However, Camilla's manipulation wasn't the only thing that quickly caused the family to fall apart. No one anticipated the tragic act that another royal would make. Prince Harry made the decision to reveal the one secret Catherine was afraid would ever come to light during Prince Louie's quiet suffering. In an uncommon in the interview, he discussed more than simply dysfunctional families. King Charles was shocked by what he said as he identified names. Just the timing seems terrible. Harry's remarks exploded like a controlled explosion as the palace battled to quell growing alarm over Louis. Exact and really intimate. He talked deliberately and slowly as though he had practiced every word for many years. This was not an impetuous outburst of rage. It was his interpretation of calculated truth. Harry suggested that Prince Louis's demise was predetermined rather than the result of fate, but by the monarchy's internal workings. He discussed patterns, with customs that prioritize appearance over action, of cautions disregarded, because doing so would require facing difficult realities concerning the lineage of royalty. His inference was disastrous. It wasn't an accident, it was protocol veiled in neglect. The line that froze the country then appeared. Harry asserted that years prior, King Charles had been informed of a genetic problem impacting specific branches of the family. A potential, a risk, something that was considered in private before being put on hold. Harry claims that the crown prioritized reputation over accountability and continuity over caution. He implied that Charles knew and opted for silence. Meghan didn't remain silent for very long. In a few hours, she repeated Harry's allegations, accusing the company of hiding private genetic assessments in order to maintain public stability. She presented it as an institutional shortcoming rather than a royal one. She claimed that even at the expense of a child, they defend the throne. The words quickly spread, causing equal parts disbelief and indignation. The weight of everything inside the palace caused Catherine to pass out. The interview was played once, then again. Every repeat made a deeper cut. Someone she had once trusted left her feeling vulnerable, deceived, and taken by surprise. This wasn't worry. Public warfare was what this was. Catherine reportedly sobbed in private. Her rage was stoked not just by the charges, but by the time. Louis was still vulnerable and frail, and his suffering had spread around the world. Spectacle William moved quickly. Bypassing protocol and aides, he made contact with Harry. The brothers decided to get together. In private, perhaps foolishly looking for clarification. Reconciliation was not what transpired. There were several accusations. Reopened were old wounds. Harry maintained his assertions. William stood up for his family. There was no resolution at the end of the meeting, just irreparable damage and harder lines. Throughout it all, King Charles remained silent, offering neither an explanation nor a refutation. No denial. Throughout the storm, his quiet grew louder than any words he could have said. Insiders muttered Charles was pressed to reply by counselors, but he hesitated. No one could say whether out of calculation, fear, or guilt. However, the lack of his voice only increased suspicions that Harry had come closer to the truth than anyone was willing to acknowledge. As trust breaks down on all fronts, Charles is left to deal with his darkest nightmare. The youngest heir is the victim of the crown's sins. When the truth was finally revealed beyond the palace's guarded doors, it struck like a blade. The family feared the diagnosis was now official for years. However, it's not just the illness that makes it intolerable, it's also the people who were aware of it but remained silent. The royal quiet that was now a curse instead of a protection. Following months of rumors, The last word came from a group of experts who were brought in under strict confidentiality, despite evasions and desperate hope. Louis the Prince, through a rare and progressive neurological illness, had been identified in the youngest face of a future monarchy. The ailment, which is difficult to identify in public, had ramifications that went much beyond bodily well-being. It discussed future thinking, competence, and appropriateness for public existence. The fact that the diagnosis could have been predicted was far more terrifying than the diagnosis itself. Internal health records previously concealed beneath the royal seal, it was discovered that symptoms had been recorded as early as infancy. Delays in motor function, peculiar speech and coordination patterns, and behavioral shifts that were written off as oddities of youth. These were not new discoveries. They served as cautions, indicators, and one name kept coming up in the old medical memos. Charles's long-standing personal physician was Sir Alistair Wyndham-King. Wyndham allegedly voiced concerns on multiple occasions. However, it's unclear if the warnings were disregarded or overlooked. It is clearly evident that the price of inaction has peaked. One tranquil evening in the nursery was the tipping point for Catherine. "Louis, will I be okay, Mommy?" she wondered, looking up at her in confusion and exhaustion. The question's innocence broke her. She reportedly broke down in tears and hugged him, unable to respond. Heartbreak wasn't limited to mothers. It was the intolerable burden of a mother having to deal with a reality, too much time spent alone. However, this crisis wasn't isolated, and now the world is left with questions that the palace may never fully answer. What really happened behind those guarded royal walls? How much did the monarchy know, and how long had the truth been hidden from the public? For Prince Louis, the story is no longer just about royal tradition or family reputation. It has become something far more personal, a young life caught in the weight of centuries of royal expectations. Inside the palace, emotions remain fragile. Trust has been shaken. Relationships within the royal family appear more strained than ever. And as the world watches closely, one question continues to echo louder with each passing day: what will happen next to the future of the royal family? If new information emerges, it could change everything we thought we knew about the monarchy. So if you want to stay updated on every new royal development, every hidden story, and every revelation that unfolds behind palace gates, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because when it comes to the royal family, the truth often takes time to surface, and when it finally does, it can change history forever.